think we're good to start. I will
Great.
let you take the lead.
Okay, I'll get us get started then. Hi, everyone. My name is Lucen Mendel, they, them. I'm the Director of Developer Relations at Carrot. And what that means is that I'm an engineer. I have a bachelor's and master's of computer science from MIT. I did a bunch of engineering work at a bunch of different companies. You can check out my LinkedIn to learn more. And also, it's good to connect with people in industry if you're looking for work. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a note when you connect with what kind of interviews you have coming up and if there's anything I can help you with. I started in engineering and I went into engineering management, and I got really involved in thinking about how do we hire engineers? Like, how do we do interviews? How do we make hiring decisions? How do we build productive and collaborative teams? And I eventually 4 years ago, found myself joining this company called Carrot that focuses on technical interviewing. And at Carrot, our mission is to make every interview predictive, fair, and enjoyable. And just to give you some context, though there's a bunch of candidates out in the world like yourselves, you're getting recruited by different tech companies. And some of those companies partner with us at Carrot so that we can do some or all of the technical interviews for those companies. We have hundreds of interview engineers. That is engineers, practicing engineers who use the Carrot platform and our questions and our training processes to conduct predictive, fair, and enjoyable interviews, and then share those observations back with the recruiters and hiring managers at tech companies so that they can figure out what they want to do. And I actually joined Carrot 4 years ago as an interview engineer myself, and got very involved, the manager and me got very involved in building that community and figuring out how do we interviewing skills and what does it mean to perform a good interview. Since then, I've moved on to question development and the science of writing good technical questions. And in the last couple of years, I've devoted myself to giving workshops and talks, mainly to engineers conducting interviews and helping people out in the world do better interviews, because that helps all of us. But I'm very pleased today to be talking with all of you and peeling back the curtain a little bit on what it means, on what your interviewer is thinking when you're interviewing with them, and sort of what hiring managers are looking for. So I'm gonna get right to it. Hi everyone, thanks for introducing yourself on the chat. And so there's a few things I want to go through. We have just over 30 minutes here today. I want to talk about how you can prepare for upcoming interviews, what kind of strategy you can use when figuring out how to best use whatever time you have to practice, how to perform in the interview itself. And in particular, I want to go through some techniques you can use for coding interviews, because those can be particularly intimidating and unusual and difficult. I think this material will be helpful to anyone, regardless of where you are in your career. I have prepared things specifically for anyone who's been in industry already and is getting back into interviewing, just because, it's easy to get a little bit rusty. And, often when you're you've been in industry for a little while, you might be trying to level up. And so you're also trying to demonstrate, particular skills and experiences. So I want to make sure I share those. Let's get started. The first thing is, how do you prepare for an upcoming interview? Your strongest ally in this is the recruiter you're talking with. You want to ask your recruiter, who are you going to be meeting with in this interview? What's their name? What's their title? Maybe you can look them up on LinkedIn. Even just knowing their title is very helpful. If you know your interview is going to be with a fellow engineer, then okay, I can dig into the details of this database work I did and these object models and these technical details. If you're going to be talking with a product manager, okay, they might be more interested in how well do I communicate? Can I collaborate well across team and across function? Do I care about the deadlines and product decisions, just as much as they do? Am I talking to a founder who is very passionate about the company's mission and they're extremely committed to this work, and they want to know that I am just as committed and passionate as them, but maybe they don't know all of the specific details of the technology they're using? So knowing who you're talking with can be very helpful. You also want to ask your recruiter for as much information as you can about what to expect. This can be logistics, like, is it going to be a phone interview where I'm writing code in a Google document? Is it going to be, I need to set up my work environment and so that I can write code locally and share my screen? Am I going to be using some new coding environment I've never used before that maybe I should practice with a little bit before the interview. Also, just what is this type of interview? Is it behavioral questions? Is it system design? Recruiters will often tell you even more specifically, hey, this interviewer is going to ask about our core values and see if you resonate with them, or they're going to ask about how you handle conflict. All these things are giving you tips for how you're going to prepare for this interview. Don't stop there. You've gotten the information you can from the recruiter, because the recruiter wants you to succeed. That helps them as well. But do additional research. Go look at the company website and figure out what their mission is. Go through all their core values or principles. As an interviewer, maybe the point of my interview isn't to know whether you've spent 10 minutes learning about our product, but it's a good look when you have done that work. It's hard to believe that someone is really interested in working somewhere if you haven't spent those 10 minutes to go figure things out. It's also, especially for technology, if you're going to be, if you're applying to work at MongoDB, but you haven't used the Mongo database yet, in a past job or in a personal project, spend half an hour over the weekend going through a tutorial and running it locally. Or if you're applying somewhere with APIs and SDKs, go use some of them. That can really help you, shine and show that you're just a little bit more interested and that you have something a little more insightful to say about what they're doing. And of course, before every interview or on-site loop, review the job description, or even make some bullet points about what specifically are they looking for. Is this a company where they care a lot about analytical decision making and being data driven? Does the job description talk about how collaborative they are and how they use relationships to get work done? Is there specific technology or processes that they're very interested in? The reason you're doing all this research is because you want to guess what questions you're going to get asked in this interview. You also are trying to guess what metrics they're going to use to evaluate you. Being a programmer is a deep and wide craft, and also just being a human is a multifaceted situation. And the biggest thing about interviews, the biggest challenge is time management. You have 30 to 60 minutes, usually like a small amount of time, to highlight why you're a good fit for this position. And so you are going to be having to shine a narrow beam of light on your experiences, and you have to be picking what's most relevant. So if this is a very collaborative environment, you might talk about your past work with that in mind, versus a company or an interviewer or a particular situation where you think, okay, for this person, they want to know how I made this decision and what data I used, and this other person might want to know more about how you communicated. So that can all be very helpful. And sometimes the recruiter is a bit vague, but all you can do is at least ask those questions and see how they respond. You're not bothering recruiters to ask them questions. They're just busy. All of those social taboos that you've learned, just being a nice, friendly human out in the world, don't let that stop you as a candidate from reaching out to recruiters and other people and asking those questions. And so the point of all of this is so that you can do a little bit of practice. I know practice is not the most fun in an ideal world. Just being an engineer would be the actual practice and experience you need to get a job at another company. I have to say, at Carrot, we work really hard on making sure that candidates know what to expect up front, and that during the interview itself, the interview engineer is going to walk you through exactly what you need to do at each stage. So there's no secret knowledge. There's no, did you prepare or not? But interviews out in the world vary a great deal. And so practice can make a big difference. And it can help also just jog your memory beforehand, about the different pieces of work that you've done. Excuse me. So I actually quite enjoy taking a job description and guessing what the interview pipeline might look like, based on the company and that role. And so I in this talk, it's going to be pretty general. If you are a current candidate and you have interviews coming up, maybe you have some information from a recruiter, a job description, feel free to send it my way, and I'd be happy to take a guess at what you should prepare, or what I think you might want to make sure that you shine, like in certain ways. Feel free to send that to me if you connect on LinkedIn, for example. But for this talk, I'm going to go through 4 questions that I pretty much guarantee all of you are going to get asked at some point, if not in every single interview, if not explicitly, then implicitly. And so it can be really helpful to go ahead and practice these ahead of time so you have a good answer. The first one is introducing yourself. Every interview is a conversation. There's going to be a little bit of time for you to set the stage and to share in that very limited amount of time something relevant to this interviewer. There's two gotchas here when you're introducing yourself. And I know, most of us, we're pretty humble. We don't like to introduce ourselves that much. It can make a big difference, and it's worth practicing. The two gotchas are giving an introduction that's too long or saying things that are irrelevant. So if you have a 30-minute conversation with a hiring manager, say, they might start off by, I've read your resume. That may or may not be true. I've read your resume. Can you take a moment to introduce yourself to me? If you spend 10 minutes going through your whole life history, well, I got into programming at this point and I did this project in college and I learned this, random language that's not relevant to your job. If you spend 10 minutes doing that, you're taking away time from what they really want to know. And if you want them to leave this interview with a very clear idea that you are a good fit for this position and to not have, unanswered questions, right? At a high level, every interviewer is really trying to figure out two things. Are you technically competent? Whatever that means for them. For an engineer, that's going to be, more technically competent than if you're talking with a product manager. Their technical competences, maybe communication and cross-team functionality. For an executive or a leader, they want to know that you're a leader and that you're motivated and you meet their core values and things. But everyone's trying to figure out, are you competent for whatever that means to them? And are you nice to work with? And so that's what they're trying to figure out. They don't need you to spend 10 minutes on this. You don't want to take away from what they're really trying to figure out. And also, they might just cut you off after a minute, in which case, if you've only talked about, say, what you did in college, and it's you've been working in industry for 5 years, you have some more relevant information to give. And especially if you're trying to tell a story of how you're leveling up, you're looking for that jump in your career, that senior role, that leadership role. You want to position yourself in a different way. You want to leave a certain impression. So think back to all that research you've done, what's relevant for this interviewer to hear, and practice, doing some introductions, and ideally call up a friend and do this practice with them. So you get to say it out loud, and it's always a bit more nerve-wracking when you're, having to talk to someone, and they can give you feedback on it. The other question you're going to be asked, whether explicitly or implicitly, is why this company? And the gotcha there is, being on research, that's not a good look. And also just maybe not being a fit. If this is a large company where you're going to be working with these highly, maybe like a CI/CD process, a deployment process that's quite advanced, and they have a lot of processes in place to protect things. You're going to need to be able to talk with stakeholders and big company stuff. You don't want to be talking about how much you enjoy working in small, nimble teams where you're inventing processes yourself. So they might worry, hey, maybe you would go rogue, or maybe you wouldn't enjoy this. And then the reverse is true. If you're talking to folks at a startup, they're trying to figure out, hey, can you come in here and wear different hats? And will you be okay inventing the processes that we don't have and sort of originating the role? So the point being is that you want to know who you're talking to, and you're trying to tell this story. Essentially, I'm going to go through 4 questions, but you can basically answer any one of these questions and hit all 4 points. And the story you're trying to tell is, I've been working at this other place. I learned a lot. I was very successful there. I was nice to work with. And now the next step in my career, the next logical step, is to work for your company. And I really want to do that. And I'm going to be successful and do great things for you as well. And you're trying to tell this positive story in that way. You also want to talk about why this role, what's bringing you forward. The biggest gotcha here that I see candidates doing is being a little too passive, just like as if things are just sort of happening to them. You want to be active. You want to show, especially for an American audience, for example, which is my experience. You want to show that you are motivated and have self-determination and can get things done, and that you are moving forward in a positive way, in an exciting way. The last thing is that you might have to explain why you're leaving your last role, or why you are switching careers, or why you are currently unemployed, or anything like that. And, because a lot of things happen. It's been a crazy year. And places may or may not explicitly ask about this, but it's always nice when you can tell a story, again, that shows that you're moving forward in a nice way. The thing to avoid here is being too negative. Sometimes there are really crappy things that happen to candidates. There can be really toxic work environments and other sorts of things like that. Things can happen in your personal life. And these interview conversations are early conversations in what is hopefully a long-term relationship. So you want this to be a healthy relationship. You don't want to base it on lies or anything like that. But you also don't need to tell all the gory details in this initial conversation. And you definitely don't want to be too negative. So if you have had some difficult, awful things in your past, my advice is to approach it as, these were some challenges I encountered. And you're not trying to be negative about it. You're trying to frame it as, this was a challenging situation for these reasons. And here's how I handled, here's what I did proactively. So I handled it. This is what I did about it. It was a fine experience. And now I'm ready for this new thing. And I want to have a bigger impact or grow my career or do these other things in this way. So that's a little bit about that. I'm going to move forward to, there's a bunch of things you can practice. You can practice coding questions. You can practice system design, behavioral questions. If you look up behavioral interviews in the STAR or SARA model, so you can start to think about the past projects that you've done and have some bullet points that you're sort of prepped on for how to talk about these experiences and answer certain questions. I'm going to move forward for, just to keep this going, but I can't emphasize enough how valuable practice is for really helping you level up in interviewing just overall as a candidate. It is a little bit of a skill, it's an interaction type skill, and depending on where you are in your career or in your life, you may or may not have, that kind of experience, and whatever time you have, it can be really helpful to practice. Anyway, let's move forward into the interview itself. Because look, at the end of the day, it's always a journey. There's always more to learn. You can't just practice forever. Don't let that ever stop you from sending out applications and doing interviews and just trying to put yourself out there and see what happens. And you can learn from those experiences too. But when you're in the interview itself, how do you impress your interviewer? Every interview, regardless of what it's actually trying to accomplish, is a conversation, right? At the end of the day, you want your interviewer to feel like, that was a nice conversation that I had with this person, and they're technically competent and nice to work with. And so I bring this up because we take this verbal communication component for granted when we're in person, but these days, a lot of interviews are remote. So there's some things we have to think about that we didn't have to think about before, including just making sure that we're heard. So one thing to think about is having a good mic, or just the sound quality in general. I guess the days of conducting interviews in noisy cafes are, not happening during the inside times for many of us. But you want to have a quiet place, and if you can have a mic that's closer to your mouth, that will always be helpful. Maybe even just headphones with a little mic or a gaming headset. You can get cheap mics on Amazon that that might be better than your say laptop microphone. Call a friend first, and see what they say about your audio. Sometimes it's just echo in the room. And so putting up pillows and blankets around your computer can help reduce that echo. You just want to make sure that the other person can hear you so that they're comfortable and you can have a nice conversation. Headphones can also be helpful. I'm not using headphones because I'm the only one talking, but I have them handy just in case. The reason headphones are helpful is because of echo. So if y'all could talk to me, and my computer just made the sound come out of its speakers, that sound might come into my mic, and my computer might think I was talking, even though it's just your voice, and that my mic would feed it back to you. And so as you spoke, you would hear an echo of yourself. To reduce your echo, I would wear headphones. And so that can be an issue. We see that at Carrot. We require all of our interview engineers to wear headphones. So just at least have them handy just in case that happens. Also have a phone handy, just so that, like a backup phone in case bandwidth fails, and have some other way to get in touch and have this conversation. And if things really aren't working, you might have to reschedule, and just be ready for that. Visual communication, it's maybe not as important for the strictly speaking. We need good, clear audio. If the video is a little laggy, that can be okay. But you are trying to make a connection with your interviewer, and it can really help for them to see your face. It's going to make this connection more empathetic. It's also going to help them know if you're stuck on a problem, or are you thinking? Do they need to provide some guidance, or do they need to give you space to think? Where they can look at your face and see, oh, are you confused? I need to clarify what I was just saying. So the visual communication can be really helpful for that. Because we're remote, consider framing. You don't want to have your whole interview where like you look like this or something. You also maybe don't want to have the entire interview where you're sitting like crosswise. Like that, you want to be able to make eye contact, especially when at the beginning when you're doing introductions. When you're writing code, maybe that's less important. On the note of eye contact, one thing that can be helpful is whatever you want to look at, put it near your camera. So put the picture of someone's face near the camera so it looks like we're making eye contact. If I'm, looking at this other part of my screen, I'm looking at your face, but it looks to you like I'm not making eye contact. That's kind of weird, perhaps. The other thing is, you can't make eye contact if the lighting isn't that great. So I have a desk light shining in my face. And that's just so that, I'm lit up. I do have a window over here. You can also have a window shining in your face. You don't want to be silhouetted. So you don't want the window or lights behind you so that your face is, cloudy or, dark and people can't see what you're doing or how you look. If you wear glasses, you have an added issue where you can get glare. And that's part of why I use a desk light, is just because otherwise my glasses just show my screen and you can't, it's kind of distracting. One trick I use is to put the backs of my glasses up a little bit so that the lenses face down. And that's because if I didn't do that, you would otherwise just see the glare of the light. But by doing this, it really does cut down on glare. So that can help. Ooh, and some people are asking questions. That's awesome. Ooh, Jenna, I will get to your question. I have thoughts on it. Let me get through the last section, which is I just want to give some quick tips for programming. And maybe everyone's heard this already, but when you're asked a technical question, whether it's programming or system design or something, solve a problem. The worst thing you can do, really, is that's a strong statement, but really the thing you don't want to do is to immediately start talking about a solution. You want to go through some problem solving steps. There's a bunch of steps here that you can go through. The point is that you want to demonstrate it's useful for three purposes. One, directly, you are demonstrating important skills that you can communicate about high level concepts, about a problem. You can, all of these steps where you get some example input and output, especially listing edge cases and explaining the approach. These two things, listing edge cases, explaining the approach, those are skills that your interviewer is probably looking for. Some interviewers will give ambiguous questions just to see how you handle it. I don't think that's great, but the whole point is have a conversation before you solve it. You're demonstrating skills that they might specifically be looking for, especially for more senior roles, right? The second thing is this is a chance for you to validate that you understand the question and that you could then spend, if you're going to spend 20 minutes writing code, you want that to be solving the right question. It's not helpful to solve the wrong question. It could be a bad look, or at best, it's just not going to help them compare you to other candidates and such. And so I really want to call out, get example input output. Interviewers don't always explain questions clearly. It seems obvious to them. It's not obvious to you. We do a lot of work at Carrot on really ensuring how questions are asked. It's such a vulnerable time for candidates. It's so easy to be confused. It's not you. Get some example input and output, because also if you can take with your human brain, if you know how some sample input connects to the sample output for a programming question, that's gonna also be helpful for coming up with an algorithm. Do I need to write valid input or not? Are there going to be multiple questions? You can ask the interviewer also, just like, is the purpose to design really nice code? Are there going to be more questions? You just need to get a working answer. Yeah, keep posing your questions. I'll get to it. I think I have 10 minutes, if I understand correctly, timing. I've gave some problem solving steps, and it's really easy to say, here's how you want to go through things. And you want to do all these other things before you start writing code. Also, again, right, the biggest challenge in an interview is time management. So if you can spend 10 minutes up front to then do an awesome run through, when it comes time to writing code, that's going to be more impressive and more helpful to you. Every time you interview, reflect back on, where did I spend the most time not sharing skills, like not sharing something relevant? Did I spend a lot of time debugging and getting lost in the bugs, and maybe I need to work on debugging in this crazy weird coding environment they've given me? Is it that I had a lot of bugs and I should maybe list my edge cases sooner and think about how to design code that's going to be less confusing to myself? Is it maybe just coming up with the algorithm to begin with? Think on those things, and that's what you can start to work on in interviews, specifically for coding type interviews. If you do get stuck, there's different techniques you can use. One of them is identify data structures. Like if you need to come up with a data structure at the end, maybe, okay, I'm going to build this data structure. How do I populate it? Well, it'd be really helpful if I had a hash map, then I could just look up the answers. Okay, how am I going to build this hash map? And you kind of try to move forward through, processing input into different data structures to get to where you need to go. That's one thing you can do. You can simplify the problem. Maybe the example input could be a lot simpler, or you can sort of ignore certain cases and solve a simpler problem if you're really stuck. Magic problems, or what I really mean is magic functions, like break a problem down into different steps. Maybe you don't know how to do step number 1, but you can solve steps 2 and 3. It's way more impressive to interviewers to see an end-to-end approach, even if there's some magic functions in there. It's not impressive, and it's really hard to evaluate someone who's perfectly completed half of a solution. Just not as good. If you're starting to run out of time, get the end-to-end structure in place. And sometimes, it's easier to solve smaller problems. So if you can break a problem up, that can be helpful. And if you have to play around with code first, that's fine. But tell the interviewer, I'm just going to play around with the code for a little bit, and then maybe in 5 minutes, I'm going to then explain my approach when that makes sense. Does the code need to execute? That really depends on different interviews. Ask the interviewer, and you'll know based on the platform. If you're writing code in a Google Doc, it's more like a whiteboard. But even if it is a coding environment, ask the interviewer, how many coding questions are there? Is this completeness based? Some interviews, they want you to get to question 2 or 3. There's going to be multiple. Some interviews, there's just one question. They want you to finish it. That looks good. Then they're going to ask you, what if this were more challenging? You're going to have a nice conversation. That's what they're looking for. Other interviews, maybe it's specifically a code review, like where you're trying to review code, or have a conversation about design patterns. Ask the interviewer what they're expecting if they don't tell you. Candace, I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, a complete answer. Yeah, I think in general, when possible, having a complete working answer is better than not. But again, ideally, if it's a nice conversation, you're getting feedback from the interviewer on what they're looking for. The two last things, then I want to move completely into answering questions more so, is that if you are in a coding environment where you can execute code, bring all of your coding best practices to bear. Again, it's all about time management, usually in these cases. That one, and the main thing is execute your code incrementally. If you are writing code, don't wait to have written 50 lines of code and then you have a bug and you have to figure out, well, where is that coming from? When you write a for loop, if you're not sure about the edge case, the range, the boundaries, is it -1? Just run it there, print it out. Oh, this is exactly what I suspect. Basically, this whole problem solving process is reducing risk, and it's validating information as you go so that you can save time. So if you are writing code that you feel is a bit risky, execute it, see what's happening so you can try to fix bugs before they show up. It looks good also to interviewers, right? Like, oh, you develop incrementally. That's a nice way to go. The same for making clear code. I don't think that code clarity isn't, to me, like a huge thing that hiring managers care about, in the sense that when we hire you, you're going to follow our, that's something that you're going to do on the job. I don't need to make a hiring decision about that. But if your code is so confusing that it's causing you to write bugs, okay, that's not great. Like, can you write clear code? Can you be effective as a programmer? That's why you want to have clear code and small methods and good variable names, and use all of those good programming techniques so that you can be successful in getting to a working solution. I do think that often, even in whiteboarding situations, one of the biggest things is, did a candidate get to a working solution? Now, it doesn't mean that having partial solutions is that you're failing. Many people get hired with partial solutions and having a good conversation. But that's just something to keep in mind. You can even ask the interviewer how important is optimality. The last thing is, small methods. That can be really helpful, especially when you can execute code, because then you can unit test as you go, and if there's issues, you've compartmentalized and made things easier in that way. Okay, that is all I have in the prepared material, and now I'm very excited to get to some of these questions. Let's see. There we go. And Jenna, you asked a question originally about how to figure out if a development team already has a female programmer. and like kind of what their culture is, and are they misogynistic, or how are things going to work out? And that's a very good question. Here's the thing: when you're a candidate, you're going through these pipelines. You have to consider, just pragmatically speaking, when you're applying to work at somewhere, you have to consider what your goals are. So when you're sending applications, your goal is to get interviews. When you're interviewing, your goal is to get an offer. And even when a lot of times interviewers will ask you at the end, "Oh, do you have any questions for me?" Your second goal is to get information, but your first goal is that you're still being interviewed and the questions you ask are still being evaluated. And you absolutely should ask questions. And I have so much I want to say about how to prepare to ask questions to different people and how to go about it. It's a really good look to ask questions. But so these are things that you can certainly ask about team culture and how many women are on the team and so forth, but also it's also risky, and just to be brutally honest. And what I like to say, the way I like to think about it is, once you get an offer, then you're at the point where you can negotiate, and you can also figure out, you're trying to make a decision. And you're in a stronger position then to ask certain questions. Another thing you can do is sort of the backdoor, like companies do backdoor references. You give them references. They're also, I happen to know someone who worked with Luce. So why don't we ask them, even though they're not an official reference, what Luce is like to work with. If you can find people who work at a company, especially once you have an offer, you can even sometimes tell the recruiter, "Hey, do you mind if I'd like to talk with the hiring manager again, or I'd like to meet someone else on the team." Or join a Slack community, reach out on LinkedIn, try to get that information. I think that can be a less risky way to figure out what you want to know. But yeah, we always kind of jump into these things. That's a great question, Jenna. Thanks for asking. I'm going to move on. What are your thoughts on take-home challenges, the need for active GitHubs, etc.? Okay, here's my thoughts, guys. There are so many different interview processes. There are so many different engineering and tech adjacent jobs. And there's a ton of things out there. There's a ton of different hiring processes. And so there's a balance between preparing to open certain doors and also playing to your strengths and figuring out, well, where do I want to apply and what makes sense for me based on where I'm at. Basically, what I'm saying is, if the more comfortable you are with all of these things, and it's worth giving them all a try at first to see, how things go. But the more comfortable you are with different hiring processes, the more doors you get to open, right? And the more opportunities you'll have. But there's like millions of opportunities. You don't have to open all of them. You just need one to work out. So in terms of when I talk with companies that are hiring, and we talk about, well, what hiring processes work for you, it really depends on what they're looking for. And there's pros and cons of different things. And sometimes the answer is to have different processes so that they can, meet the needs of different candidates. But as a candidate, you have to meet companies where they are. So my thought is, go all out. If you have a take-home challenge, do everything you can to make it really impressive and spend as much time on it as you can. That's one of the gotchas. And then again, the need for active GitHub. I mean, that's especially aimed at people who don't have prior work experience, because hiring managers, what they want to know, they want to know, will you be successful here? And one of the ways they do that is, well, do you have a proven track record? Have you been successful elsewhere? And if you have past work experience, that's going to be really great. And if you don't have that, you're trying to demonstrate that in other ways. And GitHub and showing working code is one way to kind of get your foot in the door. And other ways are, there's other ways to do that. So if you had infinite time, they're all great. And maybe give things a try and sort of prioritize. Yeah, that's my thoughts on active GitHubs. It's really a matter of sort of prioritizing, what works. And the other thing to focus on is, I think it is great to have some active GitHubs for sure. Especially if you're really going all out to get hired at Mongo and you have a personal project using the Mongo database on your GitHub, that yay. But also, focus on networking, focus on referrals. There's other ways to maybe get noticed. How am I doing on time? We're about at time, but I'm going to stay late. I'm going to keep answering questions. I want to thank everyone for joining. MK, do you need to give an announcement, or can I roll forward?
I just wanted to thank you, and everyone, please give a thank you for your time, as well as the next sessions will start at 2, so you are free to stay on and continue answering questions.
Awesome. Cool. And like I said, feel free to, you can email me at lus@carrot.com, lus@carrot.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to chat there and answer more questions. I feel like the general answers are not as satisfying as knowing specifically what your situation is and what works for you, especially, for example, the GitHub question. Would love to just look at like where your resume is and what your applications are like, what you're looking for, and give a more specific plan. But yeah, I definitely don't think GitHub is required. Man, there's a lot of questions about the GitHub situation. If you're early career, by the way, don't downplay your projects. Like everyone, everyone is kind of where they are. It's all good. It's all good. You're going after different roles, not senior roles. So don't feel embarrassed by what you've done. It's better to share. Let's see. Is there coding environments for code interviews? Is there a place to practice? Well, it really depends. So ask the recruiter what tools they're going to use, and then you can practice ahead of time, or ask for access so that you can practice. I think that's a great idea to get used to a coding environment, because it's a bit jarring and it's easy to get nervous. So try to practice that ahead of time, and don't just practice coding questions by yourself. Practice with another person so that you can be explaining your approach out loud and having that interaction. Some places use JS Fiddle, some don't. At Carrot, we have a really nice coding environment that I think it integrates well with the whole interview process, and that can be really helpful. And candidates can practice ahead of time. Is it intentional that open source libraries have awful variable names? I hope not. Hey, if you see that, maybe that's a cool refactor, like a cool you can provide help to those open source libraries and get some nice open source cred, which is even a really simple open source contribution looks so good to hiring manager, because it means that you can communicate effectively and solve a problem in a productive and collaborative way. So yeah, let's help the naming in open source libraries. I think, Jenna, my heart goes out to you. Here's the thing. This is a question I get about being the only female developer. First of all, we get to be pickier the later we get in our careers, and that's just the fact that we're gonna that there's often challenges we have to face, and it kind of sucks, but that's okay. We're strong human beings, and we can get through what we got to get through, whatever that means. So do the best you can of the situation you have. There's stepping stones to where you want to be, and if you can find inclusive and productive work environments, that can be a real joy, and good luck with that. And maybe connect with me, because I've been in tech for a little while, and I've definitely been able to find some really nice environments. So yeah, the Whisper network is also kind of a thing. But yeah, you just have to believe in yourself and your ability to make the most of the opportunities you're in, and keep figure out how that's going to be helpful for your next job hunt. I would love to talk about behavioral questions and the START method that Yvonne mentions. I have a different acronym I'm going to go through just because that's the way I see it, which is SARA: situation, action, result, and then if necessary, application. Actually, I have slides for that. I thought I would run out of time, so I'm just going to share this slide. This window. We'll just share this slide. I don't know if hopefully that's big enough to read. The main thing is that, often there's questions. The interviewer wants to know about your past performance, because that can sometimes, there's studies about what is the most predictive thing. And often asking people to imagine what they would do can be a little more optimistic than if you ask what they've done. There's problems with that as well. People have access to different opportunities. So it does take some finesse for an interviewer to understand if they're asking someone to demonstrate leadership. People have different access to leadership opportunities. And so you sort of have to figure that out as well. But that said, interviewers might ask you to talk about, these these are some common questions I thought everyone should be ready to handle or ready to answer questions about how what's a challenging project. And that word it's what is going to be the most relevant and interesting project to showcase your skills. Don't get in your head about, oh, was this challenging or not? Is this good enough? Don't worry about that. It's just have a project, have something ready to talk about for that. Difficult decisions and why, how you handle conflict, all of these sorts of things, how you exemplify certain core values, going above and beyond, or transparency, or whatever, that kind of thing. And for leveling up, how have you mentored and how have you been a leader? One great way to prepare for that is to use this SARA model, or the START model that Yvonne mentioned, and to write some bullet points down ahead of time to get your stories in order. At the end of the day, you might have 3 to 5 stories that you can use to answer questions like this, that you might reuse the same story for a different question, but highlight different parts of it. I'm going to highlight my decision-making for this kind of question. I'll highlight how I collaborated with the team. If the question is slightly different, it might be the same project though. And you want to write down a few bullet points. And I'm really glad you asked about this, Yvonne, because I love doing practice sessions around this. I think they can be really fun. You want to first give context, and you really just want to give enough context so that I know, why are you telling me this story? You basically want to say, this was a challenging project because blah, or this is what happened and here was the conflict. I don't need to know all the proprietary, like detailed information about your organization or product. It's not really relevant for our situation. So give enough context to sort of set up the drama of, directly why you're answering this question, whatever that question is. Then give the action, which is I statements, which you might not be used to doing, but I want to know, what was your role and what did you do, and that sort of thing. And then a lot of people do spend a lot of time on the situation and action, but what's most important for me, the interviewer, is knowing the result. And maybe it seems obvious to you, but I want to hear you say, and it succeeded, and we launched, and I resolved this conflict, whatever it is. I want to hear you say what happened, and I want to know why. How do you know it was successful? And did you resolve that conflict, and then did you work with that person again and things were like cool? Did you fix that bug and the customer was really happy and left some nice feedback? Did you get a exemplary performance review from your manager? Whatever it is, numbers are nice, but so is, there's other things you can say. Application is when the result is not strictly positive. Sometimes you'll be asked questions like, tell me about a time you missed a deadline, or that things went wrong. And even though you're going to try and put it all in a positive light, if things are going wrong, what I want to know as the interviewer is, I just want to know that that's not going to happen again. If we hire you, you're not going to miss deadlines. So the application is saying, I learned from this situation. The next time I had a project, I estimated the work better. I proactively communicated. I handled this situation well, and I prevented it from happening again. We had, this, customer emergency and things went down, and I handled this in a productive way. I did the best thing I could do in the situation, and I made it better so that it wouldn't happen again. I fixed the documentation, whatever it is. Tell me that you're just trying to convince me that it's bring it home. Negative ending, bring it home. That's what that is. I hope that is helpful. There we go. Yeah, for senior candidates, someone asked again. Someone asked again about, for senior candidates, is having a GitHub important? Yeah, again, if you've worked for a bunch of companies and you have a proven track record, basically, if you're getting interviews, I don't think you need a GitHub. You have to figure out where you are in your process in the pipeline. And so if you're having trouble getting interviews at all and getting noticed by recruiters, then maybe having a GitHub could be helpful. Networking could be helpful. There's different ways to problem solve what's happening. Maybe it's applying to different positions. I mean, it's going to be sort of an iterative process to figure that out. Once you're getting interviews, then you probably don't need, then if it's about the interviews or it's about the take-home challenges, or, whatever that stage is, you can demonstrate your skills that way. So yeah, I would say problem solve the problems that come up and that are the biggest priority for you, in that moment. But yeah, for senior candidates, it's not always that important. Of course it helps, or even contributing to open source projects. Again, that shows something slightly different. If you're doing practice, anytime you're doing practice sessions and solving problems or HackerRanks, you could put that up on GitHub. You don't have to have a ton on GitHub. Sometimes it's just seeing, do a tutorial and then take it, a few extra steps. This is what I tell students, because it is very helpful for students, especially if you're not at a well-known school that companies are recruiting from. It's like, how do you get people to take notice? And sometimes it's start with a tutorial, something relevant for the work you want to be doing. And then every weekend, build on that and build out the tests, build out the user experience, look at scalability, figure out how to deploy it. There's just, over time, it'll keep building and building into something that's more, that grabs more people's attention. And it's also, especially for students, it's increasing your own skills and giving you more things to talk about. Thanks, everyone. There's a bunch of thank yous. I really appreciate everyone coming to this session and asking questions. I'm going to keep answering questions as long as they are here. Question about someone who's sat in engineering loops where candidates' confidence and assertiveness has been discussed as a trait for a more senior engineer. I tend to talk a lot to my interviewer and keep them involved in the process, but I worry this can be interpreted as lack of confidence. Oh, this is a great question. I love this one because, yeah, it's a balance. And again, at Carrot, we have done a lot of work to remove the importance of confidence. The confidence is noise. If we're trying to assess other competencies, confidence is noise. And I don't want to debate whether or not confidence is a relevant metric for a senior engineer, but certainly I think it's difficult to evaluate in a very high stakes, stressful interview with a stranger. I probably seem pretty confident to you all. I'm very comfortable giving talks. There's situations where I'm going to be real shy. So, interviews can definitely be that, right? So, okay, all that said, what should you do as the candidate? Because yes, it is true out in the world that interviewers, there's two crazy things that I see in debrief meetings, like after all the interviews, when people are figuring out, do we want to hire this person? There's two things that I've seen come up which overrepresent, like they have an over level of importance. One of them is whether or not the candidate asks questions at the end of the interview, especially for leaders. They want to know that you are comfortable asking questions and that you're interested and insightful. And so always be prepared with questions to ask your interviewer, not because you want to find out information, although yes, that can be helpful. Are there other women here and so forth, but you're being evaluated. The other thing is rambling. That's every interviewer, regardless of what they're trying to assess. If they're not careful, they're not being intentional about their process and the competencies they're trying to evaluate, will evaluate how well you communicate. And rambling will come up as seen as a negative, which again is like give candidates a break. It's an interview. When I get nervous, I ramble. People ramble. It's okay, but yeah, it can be seen as like, oh, this person doesn't have a very organized thinking process. Maybe they're not that strategic, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. It's crazy. Here's what you can do. If you're a rambler, first of all, it's hard to be brief. But what you can do is just limit how much you say. Like this is when you're answering behavioral questions or sort of general questions, is to really try to turn it into that conversation where you give an overview and you don't ever give like a 10-minute lecture. Like you at least make eye contact and see if someone's following along and sort of have a conversation. And the most helpful thing you can do is to enumerate. Is when you're asked a question is to give an answer that's like, well, first I do this, then I do that, then third I do this other thing. You can just number on the spot. You can like think and write some bullets and then do it. Enumeration makes you look organized. Code. I just want to give a coding thing. This is my pet peeve, is that when I'm interviewing a candidate, there's advice that's like, share all your thoughts and tell me everything. And I gotta be honest with you, not that I'm not gonna, I know that is advice people are given. And I also know people are nervous. So I'm not gonna mark down for it, but just my pet peeve is I don't need to hear all your thoughts. Like I can read code, so you don't need to tell me everything. I want to know that you can communicate salient information, because that's what's going to be important on the job. So that's why I want to hear you explain your approach. That's why if you run your code, I want to hear you say, oh, this is the correct input, or that input does not look correct. I want to know the relevant things. If there's a bug, I want to hear you say, oh, do we have to just leave now?
No. I was just saying, everyone attending, we are coming up on time. So if you would like to join another session, they are starting in a moment. But Luz, feel free to finish your thought there. Sorry to
Okay, I'll
interrupt.
finish my thought about the communication. If you have a bug, say, oh, there's this bug, and here's what I think is happening, and here's what I'm going to do. Here's my plan. So this isn't a major point, but essentially, yes, how you communicate is absolutely a big part of a conversation and the impression you leave. So enumeration is helpful. Thinking about salient information is helpful. That said, should you change who you are and how you like to interact to fit into a norm that maybe wants you to, be like overly so confident or arrogant or non-collaborative? I mean, I don't know. That's maybe that's a different conversation about how much we, pragmatically decide to fit in to get what we want versus live, our truths. But I would certainly say whatever strategic decision you're making about this, you definitely should feel like you are a strong, capable person. You're making a strategic decision. Live your truth, whatever that means. Yeah, you don't feel bad about how you communicate. Ultimately, it's in service to an end. So if you do a great job, that's going to count even more so. Oh, there's so many questions I really want to answer. Please connect with me on LinkedIn so I can try to answer your questions there or have other follow-ups. Thanks. Oh, wait, I can keep going. Totally understand if y'all want to go to other sessions. There's other great sessions happening right now. I'm going to keep answering questions because I want to. Let's do it. Any advice on dealing with imposter syndrome when applying, interviewing for new jobs? Ooh, yeah, because hopefully you all know that this has been studied where often women or people underrepresented in tech won't apply to jobs if they think they're not going to, totally meet all the criteria and knock it out of the park. And that is, you don't want to do that. Here's one really great reason is that a lot of companies, they'll post one job rec for multiple levels of roles. And so, which is not a great practice, right? Because then early career engineers think, oh, I'm not ready for this. And then more senior candidates think, oh, this isn't quite at the level I'm looking for. It's confusing. Here's the main, and also, companies will post a job rec and then they're actually looking for other things. I mean, they don't always match up, guys. So here's the thing is, you take a scientific approach to this. Being a candidate, it's a numbers game. It's not personal. Be prepared to send lots of applications, to do lots of interviews, and to learn as you go. So I think it's always helpful to send in applications and see what happens. Now, that said, if you're applying over like Indeed or these big job boards, it's very common to not get a lot of responses. The companies might be inundated and so forth. So whenever possible, try to apply directly through, when you go to a company's, maybe you find the company through whatever mechanism, although ideally if you find it through a career fair, a conference like WW Code Connect or through meetups or, there's companies that are actively hiring, their recruiters are out there doing things, go find those events, virtual events. Then you can meet the recruiter and send them a message and say, I was at this event, I'm really excited. Always when you connect on LinkedIn, send a message. So that's a really nice thing you can do. And however you find companies, and even whether you reach out or not, go to their career page, like go to their website. Usually there's a career page, jobs page, apply directly that way, even if you're also applying on LinkedIn or whatever, just because some routes get more notice than others. And whenever possible, see if you can connect with employees at those companies in order to get noticed. I know I'm taking a tangent on this question, but I believe very strongly that and even if you don't know the recruiter at a company, if you're really interested in working there, go to their LinkedIn page, go to their people page. Don't harass random employees, but if there's a technical recruiter, reach out to them and connect and send a note and say, I've submitted an application. I'd really like to learn more. Anytime you can get that personal connection, that can be really helpful. Use your network, look through your network. If do you know someone who works there or knows someone who works at a company, hey, can you introduce me, that sort of thing. In terms of imposter syndrome, at some point your expectations do have to match. If you're doing all this work and sending all these applications and you're just really not moving forward, maybe there's something, it might be something you can change in how you represent your abilities. And also maybe you're pursuing, maybe that's the next stepping stone for you. And there's something in the middle that might help you get there. So, but that said, imposter syndrome, it's, don't let that stop you, fake it till you make it, I guess. I think that's true for a lot of us. I know I didn't become comfortable in tech for many, many years. I went to MIT, have multiple degrees. For my first 2 years out of college, I kept thinking I was gonna get fired. Like I'd come to work on Monday, be like, "Oh my God, they're gonna fire me." I've never had a negative performance review. It's just, it just didn't. I didn't feel comfortable. I want to master the material before I feel comfortable. But it does change over time, and over time you're like, "Oh yeah, I know how to do this." So keep at it. Oops, my email, luce@carrot.com. Hopefully my profile has that info. Let's see. Another question. Yes, and we're recording, so we can always come back to this later. Or you guys can always come back to this later if you're at another talk now. Let's see, are there any other questions? I understand it is important to create tests for your code. Ideally, before you even start answering a question, how would you recommend writing tests if you aren't using a program that enables you to execute your code? And when you can, are console.logs acceptable, or people wanting something more? Ooh, Carolyn, great question. Easy answer. Whoops, and I lost your question. Oh, here it is. Easy answer is, yeah, you're not expected generally to use a test environment. Absolutely use console logs, use print statements. When you write down, when you're writing down those edge cases, so often a coding question will be like, write a function that does something. Or even if it doesn't say that, usually I put your code in a function and then just print calls to that function with the sample input, and then just write next to it, put in also the expected output so that, then you can easily compare. But yeah, totally just fast and loose. Most interviews, it's time management. So fast and loose, unless you happen to use that coding environment and it's faster for you to use a test, test framework, sure, do that. But, and yeah, for whiteboards, it's, you're just listing it. Yep. Don't overthink it. That's all. You're not expected to like run tests. I think that's it. Okay, we made it. We got to the end. MK, thank you for sticking around with me. That was really generous of you as well. And
let's all say final thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Bye, everyone. Thanks a bunch. Good luck. Stay strong during those interviews. It's a numbers game. It's not you. You're doing great things, and it's all going to help you get to where you need to be. Bye.